Themes involving mirrors and the dual nature of the psyche have been present in the Remedyverse since Max Payne. Found within nearly every game, they act to facilitate a psychological experience that the characters are forced to go through. Mirrors, after all, are made to allow for self-examination. Address Unknown is a fictional TV show found within Max Payne. John was the protagonist of the show and was haunted by his evil double, who took his place in the world and taunted him from within the mirrors. If this imagery sounds familiar, director Faden had a similar experience when entering the mirror threshold. Inside, she meets a twisted reflection of herself named Esse, her dark doppelganger. In an episode of Night Springs entitled The Man in the Mirror, a man is questioned after witnesses report he beat a man to death. The fingerprints on the victim, however, came back to be the same as the murderer's. His own dark reflection is what killed him. The most developed example is between Alan Wake and Mr. as explored in American Nightmare. With how frequently this dynamic shows up in the series, what is it all about? For anyone who has seen the cult 90s show Twin Peaks, it will become obvious that Remedy took inspiration from that show in many ways. The aspect I want to focus on is the experience within the Black Lodge. Described as the shadow self of the White Lodge, it is a reality that forces those who enter to confront their own shadow self. While examples can be seen all throughout pop culture, one of the most well-known stories that deals with this is possibly in Robert Louis Stevenson's novel Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Previously, I mentioned instances within the Remedyverse where mirror symbolism was used to reflect the dual nature of the characters. In this video, I am going to go over each of these events and my interpretation on how this relates to the confrontation of the shadow self. Before doing this, we should discuss what exactly the shadow is. For that, I will hand it off to another who has more experience in this topic than I.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Max Derrat. I'm a YouTuber that frequently does videos on psychology and video games. I am particularly well known for talking about the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung and how his theories have inspired some of the greatest works in the gaming medium. The prime example of Jungian influence has to be the video games produced by Remedy. For those who have played Control, you might have noticed Carl Jung's name mentioned in several of the documents. His theories are the basis for many of the paranormal events we see in Alan Wake and especially in Control. For the purposes of this video, I will exclusively focus on Carl Jung's theory of the aforementioned shadow. The shadow resides within the unconscious part of our psyche and represents the portion of our mind that is unknown to us. These can be as simple as forgotten or repressed memories, but the shadow can include aspects of yourself that your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. In a previous Gaming University video on Psychonauts, he mentioned the concept of the Johari window. To recap, this is a model that defines how much of ourselves is known. In this model, anything known to the self resides in the light of consciousness. Anything that is not known to the self resides in the shadow. However, just because the contents of your shadow self are not known to you does not mean they cannot affect you. Jung believed the shadow to be an unconscious force that can animate one's behavior. The contents of the shadow can rise up within you and take over your conscious personality. Think of it like how anger can possess you. You don't choose to be angry. The anger chooses you. It reaches out from the shadow and holds you in its grip. The shadow is also capable of projection, where you project unconscious aspects of yourself onto others. For example, an irrational hatred of another could be due to unconscious self-hate. In this case, we dislike another because there is something we recognize in them that we dislike about ourselves. Conversely, instantly loving another could be because you recognize something you unconsciously love about yourself in another and project it onto them. The danger in this is when these shadow projections lead to unhealthy behavior. As Jung stated, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. These things that remain in our shadow contribute to our actions, some of which are irrational. So what can we do about this? In Jungian Psychology, there is a process called Individuation which addresses this. What this entails involves self-examination to actively force an aspect of our shadow into the light of consciousness. Once made conscious, the rational part of our mind can examine it and gain a better understanding of ourselves. This, however, is only the first step. What to do with that information is another step in the process. If you'd like to learn more about the concept of the shadow as well as the individuation process, I would like to direct you to my series on Carl Jung's famous text called Ion. In that book, you will not only find enlightening content, but you will also find content that is more terrifying than anything you see in a Remedy game. For now, I'll leave it up to the Dean of GU to continue our exploration into the shadow concept by exploring examples from the Remedy verse.
With all this in mind, let's return to mirror symbolism. In essence, mirrors reveal reflections of ourselves. Sometimes these reflections show more than the light going into it. In Bright Falls, Washington, Mirror Peak is one of the tallest mountain peaks overlooking Cauldron Lake. As mirrors are simply a material that reflects light, the waters of the lake acts as this mirror. However, below this reflection resides the dark place, a threshold that represents our collective unconscious and home to shadow entities. The Victorian mirror in Control gives us a different representation of the same concept. When Jessie enters the mirror threshold, she is confronted by her doppelganger, Esse.
I'm much wilder than you.
While this is a reference to Jessie's real-life actress who played a character named Beth Wilder in another Remedy title, it also reveals the nature of Esse. Part of what lies in the shadow is our repressed impulses. If all of these impulses rose from the shadow and possessed us, we would indeed be wilder in nature. The Victorian mirror reflects a shadow reality, and any conscious being who enters is confronted by their shadow self. Another, more in-depth example can be found in Max Payne's hit TV show Address Unknown. The protagonist is a man named John who claims his evil doppelganger took over his life and framed him for the death of his girlfriend as well as various other murders. This killer went by the name John Mirra. The real John was cast into an alternate version of New York called Noir York City, much like Jessie crossed over into the mirror dimension. Each time Mirra killed, the map of Noir York shifted into something new and created an endless maze that he was trapped inside. Throughout the story, John slowly comes to the realization that he himself is John Mirra. During the first episode found in Max Payne 1, he states, "Only it's not me talking to the pink flamingo, but someone who looks the part down to the finest detail, except that he's evil. I'm hiding in the shadows, watching it all unfold." Then the pink flamingo speaks and says,
"Mirrors are more fun than television."
Mirrors are more fun than television.
When the shadow possesses us, the rational part of our mind can be forced under the surface. The John, who is the main character of Address Unknown, is the rational part of his psyche that, in his own words, is hiding in the shadows.
The poet Poole, in his poem, "Somebody's Been Wearing My Face Again," wrote, "In this hall of mirrors, built by liars, I am a pale reflection of myself." I had escaped from the Pink Bird Mental Institute. I was lost in Noir York City. I couldn't find my way back home. John Mirra had made me a killer. I had become him, John Mirra. Maybe I had always been him. John Mirra. Yes, this is he. This is John Mirra. Welcome to the next level.
By the end, John accepts the violent nature of Mirra as part of himself and is ready to move on to the next step. The longer he repressed Mirra, the darker his shadow became. The contents of our shadow can be so terrifying that we actively reject it, sometimes in extreme ways. John could not accept he was capable of such violence, and his mind fractured, creating the persona of John Mirra, which acted independently of his rational mind. This form of dissociative identity disorder remained until John was able to accept his shadow for what it was. As the caller mentioned, he is now ready for the next level. As Max mentioned earlier, confronting the shadow is only the first step. Knowing what to do with that information is the next. The contents of the shadow are morally neutral and don't necessarily represent positive or negative traits. When portions of our shadow rises to the surface, we must determine if it is something that is worth keeping and incorporating into our conscious mind, or if it is something that should be eliminated. The next level for John is this decision and what to do with the aspect of his shadow named Mirra. Unfortunately, the TV show was cancelled and his ultimate fate was never known. While we don't get a resolution for John's story, Alan Wake has a similar experience that we do get resolution for. Two, in fact. During the Writer and Signal DLCs, as well as American Nightmare, Alan confronts two different aspects of his shadow. The first one occurs shortly after he dives into Cauldron Lake. Upon entering the shadow version of the Oh Dear Diner, Alan heads to the bathroom and meets Thomas Zane speaking to him through a mirror. The lost poet gives Wake two tools to use while trapped within the dark place: a flashlight and a gun.
It's not the light itself, but what it represents. You will need it. This is not a gun. It is a tool in a logical process of elimination.
The flashlight literally shines a light on aspects of Alan's unconscious to help bring forth his shadow into the light. The gun is a tool of elimination to destroy aspects of his shadow that are ultimately destructive to either himself or others. John was trapped within Noir York City, lost in his shadow where he had no defenses. Alan too is trapped in a similar dark place, but these tools make the journey easier. The shadow that Alan confronts during these two DLCs is the part of his mind that wants to surrender and remain in the dark place.
After finishing Departure, I felt finished myself. All I had wanted was to save Alice. After that, a part of me had been ready to just give in and die.
In the mock therapy session with the shade of Dr. Hartman, his mind lays out the argument that he was the source of all of his wife's unhappiness.
All you had to do was act like a loving human being for once in your life and stay with me. If your dramatic exit hadn't been more important than making sure I was all right, she would never have taken me. I don't know where you went, but that's okay. I don't want to know. I don't think I'll ever be all right. The only thing that keeps me from killing myself is the hope that I'll never see you again.
Ouch. I just can't argue with that. I think I should stay here before I ruin what life she has left.
This gives him the excuse to give up and allow the dark place to destroy him. Alan rationally understands that this is not true, but unconsciously he still wonders about it.
It was nonsense. I knew I had saved her. I'd succeeded in that, and that was all that mattered. What I heard in there wasn't the truth. It was just another toxic mirage. It cut deep, but that made me all the more determined to force myself to snap out of it.
As a result, this aspect of his shadow twists the world into a maze and sends endless hordes of the Taken after him. These Taken represent the desire to surrender. The Alan Wake we play in this section is a projection of his rational mind, so if this projection is destroyed, Wake will succumb to this insanity.
The part of you that is in control is in the cabin, dreaming and insane.
I don't think I like that.
You represent the part of Alan Wake that is capable of rational thought and planning.
Zane, however, equipped us with the tools required to deal with this. By shining the flashlight on the Taken, he burns away the darkness and metaphorically brings these self-destructive impulses into the light of consciousness. Deciding they are parts of his shadow that are not worth keeping, he eliminates them with a gun. However, Alan's luck will eventually run out, so his mind reaches into his unconscious and pulls out a new weapon that will permanently burn away his desire to surrender: a lighthouse. The final section of the Rider DLC involves Alan circling the lighthouse and breaking giant boulders which allow the light to destroy any Taken in the region. After climbing inside the lighthouse, he is able to rest in a safe place where the Taken can never approach. This lighthouse is a mechanism of his psyche that wards off the impulses of surrender. Moving to American Nightmare, there is a different aspect of his shadow that he confronts, this time in a form that is far closer to evil than the last one.
Purely evil? Thank you, sir.
Mr. is a rustic pseudonym for the devil, and the Old English word scrat can refer to a goblin or demon. In old fairy tales, goblins can be symbolic of an uncontrolled impulse such as greed, lust, or wrath. Prior to the events of the game, Alan was known for drunken parties and assaulting paparazzi. On multiple occasions, we see his hair-trigger rage spark up when he attacked Dr. Hartman, or when screaming at and running out on Alice at the cabin. Alan has a darker side, as can be intuited by the focus of his Alex Casey crime novels. To imagine such darkness, it must exist within him in the first place. He attempts to keep it under control, but each time his rage flares up, we can see the potential for violence hiding in his shadow. Mr. is what Alan would be if he allowed these impulses to possess him, an unfiltered demon of Alan's own shadow. Up until this point, Alan had not acknowledged this part of himself. As mentioned earlier, Jung believed that if we do not accept certain parts of ourselves, they will control our lives and we will call it fate. This is what allowed Alan's behavior to be controlled by these violent tendencies. When John had his experience, he developed a string of mental illnesses that fractured his psyche and created Mirra. For Alan, the dark place allowed this internal struggle to present differently, and Mr. was formed as a separate entity. Mr. is what Alan sees in the mirror, his own shadow reflected back. There is a danger, though. If he can see this darkness, the shadow sees him as well. If he is not careful, Mr. will consume his conscious mind, and Alan will be lost. This is the purest definition of demonic possession. John's story ended at the confrontation. Now that Alan has reached the same point, he has a decision to make. Is this aspect of himself worth keeping, or something that should be eliminated? As is obvious, this part of his shadow must not be allowed to roam free. At the drive-in theater, the light from the projector burns away Mr. The film being played is a documentary by Alice Wake that captured the best parts of their time together. It is a symbol of everything that is good about his nature, and used as the light to keep the demon at bay. Granted, our shadow can never be eliminated. Alan created a lighthouse to keep away his desire to surrender, but these impulses never stopped trying to break him. Alan's individuation of Mr. allowed him to bring his violent impulses under control. When residing in the unknown shadow, roamed free in Alan's psyche. Now that he has been made conscious, he can be controlled. The ultimate goal of the individuation of the shadow is to bring balance to these two parts of our mind. The journey of John and Alan parallel one another in multiple ways. Both are forced into an alternate world. Both are forced to confront an evil doppelganger. And both are guided by a poet. Alan by Zane, and John by Poole. Alan even sees evidence of Mirra in the dark place. In the bathroom of the Oh Dear Diner, there is graffiti on the wall that says Mirra was here. There is also a link between the two poets. In This House of Dreams, Samantha Wells finds a shoebox full of Zane's old poems. Handwritten on one of them is the very same line from the poet Poole that John recalled before the phone call with his shadow.
In this hall of mirrors, built by liars, I am a pale reflection of myself.
It appears that Remedy left a trail of connections to let us know that these two men went on the same psychological journey, one that we all can go on if we are brave enough to confront our own shadow. In conclusion, let's use the metaphor of a garden. Our irrational impulses are plants poking above the surface, but are rooted in the darkness of our shadow. Remedy uses mirrors to allow their characters to look under the surface. For us, intensive self-examination is required to produce the same effect. Individuation involves digging down into the soil of our mind and uprooting things that have been buried there. Once above the surface, we determine which ones are poisonous and which ones bear fruit. By recognizing the part of our mental garden that are poisonous, we can more easily control it, but we also risk being poisoned by it. If we uncover something positive that bears fruit in the shadow, we replant it and incorporate it into our actions moving forward. By doing this, the garden of our mind becomes a healthier and more enjoyable place to be in.